Well, for my part, I'm recording this portion of the phone conversation that we're having. Um, no, for sure, I'm not recording anything that you're saying, but I'm recording my portion. Yeah, there's no logical or sensible reason for not teaching Black history, whether it's in K through 12 schools or in higher ed. Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think there's a big difference between teaching Black history and learning Black history. Anyone that's, excuse me, anyone that's opposed to having Black history taught in schools, what you're really saying is that you are against individuals learning about a core part of history. You are preventing someone from learning about history. And if you are doing that because of your own political or social ideologies, I think it's criminal. I'm going to come right back. I'm going to start off, like most times with these conversations, they lead to episodes for the podcast. So it was good talking to you. And I hope that you join me on the podcast later. For now, I want to get back to my audience. Welcome, guys. Episode 3, Let's Chew the Gum. Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. We talk a lot about a lot of things in this show while we chew the gum, and just like every show, we always have
something for your mind. Something for your mind. Something for your mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것 필요합니까?
Something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind.
정신을 집어넣으세요.
Something for your
Welcome back. Season 2, Episode 3 of Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. I'm your host, Protocol. Glad to be back with you. I still have a few new listeners. Shout out first to all my long time listeners. This is our second season. Maybe this will be the 20th, 19th, or 20th episode. But shout out to my listeners that have been with me for quite some time from all around the world. I do have some new listeners that often ask me, why is it called Let's Chew the Gum? Or I talk to folks and they ask me, why is the podcast entitled Let's Chew the Gum? It's just a take on the phrase, let's chew the fat, or chew on the fat, meaning a conversation. But also, on a personal note, I do some of my best focusing when I'm chewing gum. I remember as a teenager playing sports, chewing gum always gave me a bit of focus. I noticed Michael Jordan chewed gum a lot playing basketball, and I did the same. It helped me to regulate my breathing, but it also, gave me supreme focus. So, whether I'm working on a document or a paper, chewing gum kind of gives me that focus. But it's also, a metaphor for let's talk. And for all my English language folks out there, if metaphor is not the proper phrase, go ahead, shoot me an email. So we talk about a lot of topics on this show. And as you heard in the intro, this particular topic, this particular episode is inspired by what I would say the need to teach Black history in schools. It is Black History Month, and so I'll continue in that realm. In the meantime, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to email me at letschewthegum@gmail.com. That's letschewthegum@gmail.com. You can also follow the page on Facebook. Do I have my Twitter page up yet? Instagram? If not, I'll get it up soon. I was had quite a few other ventures with Instagram and Twitter pages and whatnot. But for now, you're listening on whatever podcast platform that you are on. And just be aware that you can catch me on multiple podcast platforms. Basically, anywhere you receive podcasts will be there. And if not, let me know, and I'll be sure to get the show uploaded to that platform as well. So let's get back into it. I was having a conversation, and a lot of times I'll let you tune into at least my portion of a phone conversation or a conversation with someone, because oftentimes it makes a great introduction to the show. So in this particular one, we were discussing the need for Black history, and there were some counterpoints that we don't need to teach Black history. Some folks believe that when you teach Black history, somehow it's controversial or unpatriotic, and I don't understand that. You can help me understand that. Again, shoot me an email. Let me know why would that be unpatriotic. Some folks have sentiments that teaching Black history just conjures up problems, or it keeps things going, and I'm going to counter those in this particular episode. So first of all, I actually took a couple of notes. I wanted to make sure I didn't miss anything that I wanted to say on this topic. But so why teach Black history? I think it's important because there's a lot of misnomers out there about Black people and Black culture. And so teaching Black history is important to counterbalance that. We can't depend on the media or other entertainment outlets to teach that history for us. And although as of late there's been some pretty good releases out, there's always been documentaries, but oftentimes they're hard to find. Sometimes they come on late at night when no one's watching, so you don't get a chance to see it, or they're not highly advertised when it is a positive show about Black people or Black contributions or whatever it may be. So sometimes it's difficult. Also, we have to hold accountable those institutions that put out this information, because we can't guarantee that they are sufficiently informed to tell the stories the way that they need to be. But we are making progress in that. But making progress is not the same as reaching a goal. So we want to attain some goals here. So we want to be able to tell those stories to counterbalance the misnomers about African American or Black culture. And I'll just say Black to be inclusive of a worldwide phenomena, right? African American, I've heard people look at folks in other countries and call them African Americans. Well, they're not African Americans. That would be an American thing. So that's important. We really have to educate young folks that are coming up, because they are massive consumers of information, just like a lot of us. But if they don't have filters, if they don't have accurate representation or a way to critically think about the information that they are consuming, it can be difficult and dangerous. And as you know, just like you see young kittens and young puppies, they're so cute when they're young, just like young people, sometimes they can grow up to be pretty vicious and ugly. And we see that. Everyone's cute as a baby. I suppose there's some ugly babies, but not yours, right? But when folks grow up and have false narratives, suppose they go into politics, suppose they go into education or any other field where they are servicing or responsible for servicing large groups of people, and they go in there misinformed, or they have some warped perception or some bad experience that's over influenced their perception, that can be dangerous, because again, they become the gatekeepers, they become the storytellers about things that they may be highly uninformed about. Excuse me. So we have to educate young and the old. There's so much negativity out there, so that's important. And not only that, but if you're going to tell a story of any type of history, it needs to be inclusive. And we know that, and if you don't know, now you know, we know that the significant and overwhelming contributions of Black people have been suppressed, have been completely eliminated or left out or falsely instituted within our education system, particularly through textbooks. And I'll go further. The teachers that are teaching, it's whatever it is, but approximately 80 to 90% of teachers in the United States, I'm speaking of, are white. Not a problem to me, but when you have a vast majority or a majority of students, especially now being students of color, those teachers that are teaching need to be informed about those particular cultures that they're teaching. And we can talk about other cultures as well outside of Black culture. But, when Blacks benefit, all people benefit. When Blacks are included, all are included. Look at affirmative action, which overwhelmingly benefited white people via white women, right? White women were the major benefactors of affirmative action. And hence, those benefits extend to the white family, which is fine. However, those programs were targeted towards folks that were formerly known as minorities, but they didn't benefit from them so much. Look at civil rights. Civil rights movement for African Americans. Look how many people benefited from that, including white women and, as an extension, white families, but Native Americans, LGBTQ communities, other Americans, Native Americans, Asian Americans, all those civil rights movements, many of them sprouted from what started out as movements for Black people. So it's important to get these histories within the classrooms. I had a few folks that submitted some questions or statements regarding this topic, and I've talked to folks, all the time about including or teaching Black history, and I'm often asked, can I, provide resources for individuals, or can I come and speak to classes? And I'm always more than happy to do that. And I say that to say a lot of folks have issues because they feel like, and I'm going by what has been told to me directly, they feel as if they can't teach Black history because they aren't qualified to teach it, or they feel because they aren't Black, that makes them not qualified to teach Black history. And I try to encourage them that you don't have to be, or remind them that you don't have to be Black to teach Black history. Just like I'm not a person of Caucasian descent and I teach European history. All right. You just have to be informed. I'll say it again. You just have to be informed. And the way that you become informed is by learning. So when I go back to that statement earlier about, whether you feel it's a great idea to teach Black history or not, if you are preventing that, you are preventing folks from learning. And everyone has a right to learn, right? So if you are an educator or anyone in a position of power, authority, or serve as any type of gatekeeper, I think that it should be mandatory that you learn the histories and cultures of the individuals that you're going to encounter. I just think that's part and parcel. All right. So again, some folks have difficulty because they feel unqualified. Again, they've been made to feel that it's taboo, or that it's contradictory or controversial, I should say, to teach Black history. So they often ask me, how do you talk about these topics? How do you talk about these controversial topics? Well, first, remove the idea that they're controversial. They're historical. There are controversial topics when it comes to what people are comfortable in hearing. But history in and of itself, I wouldn't categorize it as controversial. It's what happened. And, depending on the age group and maturity level of the audience that's going to receive the message, you can alter the story and find ways to tell it so that they can receive it at whatever level they are. But I'm thinking, for high school, particularly U.S. history, 11th grade on up, it just needs to be taught. That begins with educating yourself. So you need to be sure that you're educating yourself about these topics. All right. Because you really need to be able to act as a counterbalance within, that the realm of education. And so you see so many people unprepared to teach these histories because guess what? They weren't taught in their schools. It wasn't something that was taught in their school. So can't you see even from that? That's why it's important to teach it. We have teachers and educators and others who are not able to teach it or are reticent or hesitant to teach it because they aren't informed enough about it, yet they're teachers. And they aren't informed enough because they didn't receive that education. Does that make sense? We could stop right there as a reason why Black history should be taught, right? The best teachers are the ones that are informed themselves. So we need to be open about this. My approach is in my classes that I teach, again, whether at the high school level or university, is, we're going to talk about it. And I let everyone know we're going to talk about lots of topics that are controversial. And I really phrase it like this. We're going to talk about all the low down, dirty, disgusting, terrible things about history, right? Not to accuse anyone or to make anyone feel guilty, but because it's history and we need to learn these histories, right? So many people are lost currently, mentally, emotionally, socially, because they don't have their histories, whether it's their family histories or the history of their country, or in this case, Black history. So be open about it. And when you don't know, when you're ignorant about it or confused, be open about that. Seek out someone or seek someone who does know. Don't be afraid to say you don't know and that you need help. All right. Be a counterbalance within your social groups. When you hear false narratives being, spewed out by others, be courageous to speak up in those situations to help educate the masses. And I know that's uncomfortable and it's difficult, because we want to have the love and respect of our friends and families. And oftentimes they may have aversive ideologies or ideas about certain particular groups of people. And they may say things that are racist or things in that nature. And better, then it's your job to say something. And I would just encourage you to do so. I can't say, you should. I'm not going to put a moral, type of ethical standard on it, but I think you should. It's that important. So when it comes to talking about these topics, when it comes to educating yourself, I like to use the phrase that associated with the Nike brand, just do it. Just do it. Right? Just do it. It's that important. And it's evident by, again, just the fact of how this is 2021 and we still are having negative encounters around race. Okay. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll come back in a moment to talk more about this topic and more. You're listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. Again, feel free to email the show at letschewthegum@gmail.com for show topics or to be a guest on the show. We'll be right back.
Mind. Something for your mind. Mind.
Please mind the gap.
Something for your mind.
무엇인가 정신을 집어넣으세요.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it could be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast also with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So what are you waiting for? Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
All right. Thank you for listening to our sponsor. We appreciate that. Welcome back to Let's Chew the Gum, episode 3. We're discussing the need to teach Black history in schools. Why should we teach Black history? Hopefully you've caught the first part of this episode. So we're going to move on in the discussion and just talk about a few reasons, more reasons why, or re-emphasize the reasons already stated in the first half of the show. One of the main reasons I like to encourage discussion about these topics within my classrooms is because I've seen so many fights. I've seen so many fights, and not just at my school in the past, but in many schools. News of race riots, people fighting over racial issues, and a lot of times these fights were including young Black kids, or along with other groups, and sometimes not. But the benefit of discussion, I prefer discussion over fussing. How about that? Discussion over fussing and fighting. When you give folks an outlet and an opportunity to discuss and talk in a safe environment, it's likely that those same folks won't resort to violence or any other negative activities when it comes to expressing themselves. Oftentimes people just need to be able to express, right? And particularly with this topic that, for some time in students' lives, let's look at the life of a student. They've been taught or that it's controversial, that they can't talk about it, that they can't say the word Black even to say the word Black is somehow bad. I hear all the time people will whisper that word. They'll be talking about, the other day I went to the store and there were these Black people, it's a whisper. And I would say, why are you whispering? Why, what is that about? I mean, that's an indication of prior learning that somehow it was bad to even state that. So if you have people feeling that they can't even say the word Black, how can they have these discussions? And when they encounter someone that's Black that may be passionate about history or culture or whatever, how do they engage in that conversation? Right. And so you can see the potential buildup for tension and misunderstanding when you have someone that can't even say the word Black or feel like they can't even say the word Black. So obviously they haven't been able to have discussions in the past about it, or hasn't been emphasized or talked about. So I prefer discussion over fussing. I prefer discussion over fussing and fighting. Right. So in my classes, I provide a safe space for individuals to talk about not just Black history, but all history, all topics. Our student populations are so diverse, and everyone has a right. From a quote from my favorite, not my favorite movie, but from a movie I like, everyone has a right to contribute a verse. Everyone has a right, and you don't have to agree with each other, but we can understand each other and listen and learn. And so that includes discussions around Black history. Make folks feel comfortable to be able to talk about it in those areas, right? To eliminate these instances of fights, especially those based upon racial lines. Another reason is to really, racism still abounds. Like I said in the first segment of this show, there's still so much racism. And over the past 4, 5, 8, I don't know how many years, it's just become so overt. And I can't say that I don't appreciate the overtness, because I know where it's from, right? I see the sources, and it makes it easier to combat or to address, right? I think that most people that are, again, either racist or support racism, it's out of a level of fear, unjustified fear, fear of loss. Is it fear of competing? Is it a fear that you won't be able to attain what it is you want to attain because of someone's of a different race? I don't know. But having these discussions, I think it eliminates the fear, because people are only afraid in these situations because they don't know. People fear what they don't know, right? What's in that dark alley? I'm afraid. What's behind that door? I'm afraid to open it. And again, even those fears are things that were inbred in folks. Again, watch this, from movies, right? Overexposure to horror movies as a kid. So you think, every dark alley or behind every closet door or under every bed, there's a monster, right? It's the same type of inbred fear that goes with the misassociation of crime, ignorance, and danger when it's associated with black people. So those same type of fears are inbred, right? And so that leads to racism. And it's dangerous. Again, you fear what you don't know. And when you fear something, you want to get rid of it, right? You have to eliminate it so that you don't live in fear. And so when you see the elimination or the eradication of black people, and whether it's opportunities or their actual lives, it comes from a place. And we have to address that. It hasn't been sufficiently addressed. Too many people are, as opposed to addressing it, they're suppressing it. And we can't suppress it. We have to bring it out in the open. And just like a parent comes in and shows a child under the bed, there's nothing to fear. Look, there's nothing there. Look in this closet. There's nothing there, nothing to fear. So as educators, and when I say educators, I'm not talking about just those with certificates. Anybody and everybody that has an influence over others, sometimes you have to help them to remove the fear, right? It's irrational, and an irrational fear. That doesn't mean that you won't have a bad encounter with someone of a particular race. That doesn't mean you won't have a bad encounter with something under your bed. It could be a big spider or something under your bed and it bit you, right? Does that mean that under every bed you are going to have in the future that there's going to be a spider that bites you? No. Just like you may have had a bad encounter with someone of a particular color. In this case, we're talking about Black history. So a bad encounter with someone who's black. Does that mean that every black person is that way? No. Does that give you the right to go out and start spewing racist comments about black people because you had a bad encounter? No. I don't care if you had 10 bad encounters. That's still not indicative, or still not because someone was black. So you took 10 out of millions of people and decided that 10 was the norm, right? No way. So we have to, discuss these things to help combat racism. Keep these discussions going within the schools, within the parks, within the homes to talk about these. And again, if you are someone who's uncertain of what to talk about, if you are someone who doesn't have the experience talking about these things, then find someone. Email me, call me up, email me. I'll talk for you. I'll speak with you. I'll walk you through it. All right. It's not that difficult. By all means, we have to discuss these topics. We also need to combat, how can I put it, a lot of hypocrisy. Right, I think, and I'll speak on this topic, and we're coming up on the end of this segment soon. But this one topic associated with Black history, Black culture, however you want to phrase it, when individuals like Eric Reed or Colin Kaepernick, or you go back to Muhammad Ali, you can go Jack Johnson, you can any celebrity. In this case, we're talking about the athletes. When they have protested or used their voice or their platform to protest because of indignities or inequities that they themselves were experiencing, and they chose to serve as a spokesperson for others who are experiencing those same inequities or indignities, have spoken up. Let's focus on a most recent one and a more popular one these days with Colin Kaepernick. People were up in arms about him kneeling, right, during the national anthem. Controversy. I mean, so much money was spent on just talking negatively about it and talking positively from some other sectors. So much attention was given to it. So much money was spent, whether it was news channels covering it and taking trips and reserving hotels and paying for food for reporters to be wherever they were, or for news channels to use their airtime and sponsors to sponsor or decide to not sponsor. Right? There's a big economic influence on that as well. The point is, when others have protested, let's look at most recently the protests that were in the Capitol by various groups of individuals when former President Donald Trump was leaving office. Right, when those particular groups, who the majority were white, were protesting because of what they believed was an unjust situation. I saw the United States flag being desecrated, literally being used to beat a police officer. I've seen it improperly thrown about on senators' desks as protesters violated a sacred trust, as protesters occupied seats of representatives and senators and tossed the U.S. flag about. I saw one protester stealing a U.S. flag. And there may be stories or outrage when people see that, but nowhere close to the outrage that came about when Colin Kaepernick was kneeling. And he didn't desecrate any flags. He just kneeled during the national anthem, right? And I say just because, folks were feeling some type of way about feeling the flag was dishonored. Where's the outrage there for what was done in the Capitol just surrounding the flag issue? Where's all the sustained discussion specifically about that? So when we talk about the importance of teaching Black history, the way that Colin Kaepernick situation was taught and exposed was not indicative of the labels of patriotism that I see being put upon those that did some things that were much more egregious. When you look at what Colin Kaepernick did to protest police brutality and say, hey, these things are happening and we wanted to stop, and I'm doing this to bring awareness, right? How many people focused on the historical wrongs that he was trying to bring attention to? And I'd say historical and contemporary, because it hasn't stopped. Why wasn't focus put on that as opposed to him kneeling? That became the narrative. You notice that was the narrative, that he is desecrating a American tradition or whatever. But what about the reason why? The loss of lives of Black people for ordinary reasons. People just coming and going about their day. No criminal activity, no criminal records, no threats of danger, and they don't make it home. Right? And I wonder, if a lot of folks had known, and many folks knew history and didn't matter, but if a lot of folks had known the history of why he was doing that, maybe there would have been empathy and sympathy. Maybe that would have been a rallying cry for many Americans to join together to support what is ethically, morally, constitutionally correct, which is the equal protection of individuals, especially here in this country. Right, I know I have listeners all around the world, but with speaking specifically about within the United States right now. Why wasn't that the focus? Is it because folks didn't know Black history? They don't know about the lynchings of blacks and the killing of blacks and the inequitable treatment of Black people throughout the country? Especially some young people, when it's not taught in schools, they don't know. They just see what's happening now. They don't have a way to make a connection, to even become empathetic, to even look at programs, policies, and practices of our institutions to make sure that they are just for all people, that they are justly administered for all people. They don't, have the opportunity to look at redlining and discrimination in communities and housing, right, and healthcare. They don't get those narratives. So I imagine if they saw a Black guy complaining, especially during the national anthem, maybe to them it was a little bit sacrilegious. So we need to educate those folks, right? Just like many of those that stormed the Capitol want sympathy or empathy and understanding of why they're doing that. Right? Is there a lesson in history that we need to look at? Well, sure, there are. I spoke of some on the first episode of season 2. Sure, there are. So, the teaching of Black history is not just because it's Black History Month, or not because it's some controversial anti-patriotic thing. It's important to gain a level of understanding for all people. I would venture to say in the United States, no one has had a longer history of the need for protest than African Americans. There's always folks that are unjustly treated, but the sustained unjust treatment, the sustained unjust false narrative placed upon African Americans is something different. In the Americas, and I'm not talking about just the United States now, we can go worldwide. We can go from Patagonia, the tip of South America, all the way to the Arctic Circle. If we're going to talk about the Americas, we can go worldwide if you want to talk about, Aborigines in Australia or natives in Hawaii. How far do you want to go? But Black history is necessary to be taught. And as I said before, when Blacks benefit, everyone benefits. Because when we talk about the plight and then the history of repression and of Black people, and then we begin to get to a point where we try to rectify that, everyone benefits. The Black experience is like the tide in the ocean. When that tide rises, all the ships on the ocean are going to rise up with it. So as people become more empathetic with that and give proper attention to that and give proper redress of those issues, they benefit as well. It's no need to look at it as, a Black issue. Well, there's some things that are specifically Black issues, but everyone benefits when we address those. Everyone. I gave the example of affirmative action. It benefited most white families because it benefited white women, and so as an extension, white families. I talked about the African American Civil Rights Movement. Everyone benefited from that because as attention was given to that particular group, right, other groups were able to have a foot in the door and to make strides for themselves as well. So Black history is American history. Black history is world history. Black history is not an exclusive thing just to be taught during Black History Month, but it is something that's to be taught all year round for the benefit of everybody. So I would ask you in closing, as I'm about to end this episode, to take a look at yourself and assess what it is you know about Black history. Assess what it is you don't know. And when you see issues that are happening, when you see what's being reported on television, news, social media, engage in some critical thinking. Begin to think for yourself or ask questions. And if you're lost, ask questions. Reach out to the show. Reach out to me. You have my email, letschewthegum@gmail.com. Reach out to colleagues, friends, read up. Find someone that's more aware than you to educate yourself. It doesn't mean that you have to give up whatever it is you believe in, but just, trust in the process that, education is going to lead you somewhere better than where you are right now. So with that, I encourage you, all the educators, administrators, folks from all walks of life, healthcare, educate yourselves. And if you don't know, ask somebody. You've been listening to Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. I'm your host, Protocol. Again, email the show at letschewthegum@gmail.com if you have further questions, topics you'd like to see addressed on the show, or if you'd like to be a guest, or just ask a question. We'll chat it up. Thank you so much. You've been listening. I've been speaking. And as always, we have